You may not know that Bordeaux isn't just a wine. It's over 6,000 producers in a region that's been perfecting its craft for centuries. From legendary chateaux that sell bottles for thousands of dollars to small family vineyards turning out hidden gems for everyday tables like ours. Bordeaux is definitely a world within a world. And today on SoCal with Val, we're pulling back the curtain with one of the most respected Bordeaux experts in the United States, actually in the world, Tristen Beamon, co owner and CEO of the Wine Exchange here in Orange County. Tristen has spent decades walking the vineyards of Bordeaux. He knows them like the back of his hand, tasting in century old cellars and curating wines that make this incredible region approachable for all of us. I can tell you I was there once and I mentioned his name, and everybody knew Tristen Beamon, and they were so glad that they did. They all talked about their friendship. So he's known the world over. Whether you're a seasoned collector or you're someone who just enjoys a nice glass with dinner, or you really don't know that much about wine, but you like history, stay tuned because this is going to be an episode worth listening to. And this conversation will help you discover Bordeaux in a whole new way. Tristen, welcome to SoCal with Val.
Thank
Tell
you.
us
Thank you
a
so
little bit
much.
about your background. I've known you for a while, but I really don't know how you got started as much as we've talked a little bit about that with your partner, Kyle.
Yeah, well, I started actually at a college when I was up living in Los Angeles. I was going to school up there at UCLA. I would go Bruins. Pretty
Go
sad year
Bruins.
for
All season. Yep.
football, but needless to say, when I was working as a waiter, kind of put myself through school, and I just, we were serving wine in the restaurant that I was in, and I remember working a party, and I worked this party for a famous celebrity, and uh, and after the party, there was leftover wine, and he selected some very nice wines, let's just say. And so after the party was done, a couple of waiters and I were in the back in the kitchen, and we kind of poured ourselves a glass of wine, and I had a sip of the wine, and I just went, "What is this?" And I've had wine before. Uh, my father was kind of into wine, and we used to travel to Napa every now and then. But then again, I was a kid; I couldn't really drink it. And he mainly would collect it. He would never drink it himself, which is kind of odd. For that moment, I'm like, I got to learn more about this. And so I went to a couple wine shops up in LA. I got to know the guys that worked there. And I was a waiter, so I didn't have a lot of money. So people were kind of just throwing things at me, let me try different, things. And from then I just started to really hone my craft. And after school, I moved down here back to Orange County. I grew up here in Orange County, by the way. And I started working at a restaurant, and it was Cano's. I don't know if any of you remember Cano's, that was on the water in Newport Beach. And
Absolutely. That
and
was a long time ago.
it was, and then turned the windows on the bay. But I was really, I was intrigued more, and at that time we had these things called captains, which were now called sommeliers. And
Right.
so
Oh, that's right.
I used to work with the captains, and they would kind of explain to me certain wines, et cetera, et cetera. And so from that moment, I just got really into it. I started to go to Napa. I started to try to learn more about wine itself, and then I was promoted to captain at the restaurant, and so I became the wine buyer. And from that moment, I kind of just fell into it. And then for a moment, I actually got out of the wine business in the 90s, and then I got back into the wine business. After I sold my company, I started a company. I sold it in 2000, and then I got back into the wine business, into the retail side that I'm in right now. So I've been doing this now for 25 years, quite a long time
So you and your
actually.
partner, Kyle, kind of have a similar background that you both just kind of fell into it and then just grew your amazing curiosity for wine,
It,
right?
it's wine is fascinating. It's a
I
fascinating business. There's so much. It changes all the time. Every day there's something new. It's a lot like the stock market in a way, because wines get graded, so we're always on the prowl. to, a wine comes out and gets 95 points. We're on the phone with the distributors, we're on the phone with their importers, we're on the phone with their suppliers in Europe, trying to obtain the wines. And so that part of it is, I think it's really fun. I really enjoy getting up in the morning and I go through my emails for all my French suppliers, and then I get to work, and then I see a lot of the suppliers that come here, it's just it's an interesting, fun business, but it is a business. So both Kyle and I, we we run the business. We have employees. We have healthcare. We have all that other stuff too, that goes with it. But in general, it what gets me up every morning. It's really a fun business to be in.
And how did you and Kyle meet?
We met actually back in the when Kyle started working at Wine Exchange. I was in like I said, a different field, but I was really into wine. So I used to go to Wine Exchange, and I just started talking with Kyle, and then we became friends. We have kids like the same age, and they'd come over to dinner, and then when I sold my company, um, he asked me what I was doing. What's my next plan. And at the time, my wife was like, he's driving me crazy. He's painted the hallway 6 times. He's out in the garage. Because I literally wasn't working. um, and so he's like, "Why don't you come work for us? And maybe just work part time at the wine shop." And so I went in. I met with Steve, who was a friend as well, and
Right.
who's the owner of Wine Exchange. And then I went and worked part time for like 3 days a week. And then my background was software before I got into the wine. And so I looked at Wine Exchange and I said, you have something here that's very unique that I think you can capitalize on if you can use technology to capitalize on it. And Steve was very receptive to that. He said, "Sure, let's go with it." So we, you know, developed the website. We had a pretty big list because Steve used to write this really interesting newsletter that came out once a month. That was my wine Bible, by the way. I mean, I used to look forward to that newsletter, go through it page by page, pick wines to go and buy.
Is that right?
Yeah,
Oh my goodness.
the stock, it was called the stock report, and it was handwritten by Steve, and it was like 64 pages of just so much information. It was just a labor of love for him, and so so with that technology that I had, I created a font in Steve's handwriting, so that way we can type out instead of handwrite the newsletter. And then we developed a website. We developed more the online side of our business and really went with that. And that's kind of what was my specialty in wine. And so I went from 3 days working part time to being full time to running the store to being the Bordeaux buyer to, it just kind of stepped up from there. And then Kyle and I left, started our own business, Best Wines, as you well know. And
Yeah.
then a few years later, we went back and bought Wine Exchange.
Yeah. Yeah, and for our viewers and our listeners, how I met you is an interesting story. I drive up and down the 55 freeway between my home and my office every day, and I saw a sign on your building that said Best Wines Online. And I was on a committee for a charity wine auction. And one night, and I knew the least of anybody on this committee. And one night I said, "Oh, there's this new store going up on the freeway, and it says Best Wines Online." And somebody says, "Oh, those guys, they're never going to give you anything." I said, "Well, I'll go in there and see." So knock, knock, knock. I went in and I saw you had like a little pool table, and it was just a really cool vibe. And I opened the door and I thought, I love this place. So you came in and said, "I don't think you were even open yet. I think you came. So, can I help you?" I said, "Yeah." I said, I'm in this wine auction thing. And I wonder, will you guys donate anything?" He said, "Yeah, sure." And "You will?" So I went back to everybody. I said, "You're wrong." I went and asked them. They're really nice guys. And that was the beginning of our friendship. And you've been great friends. And I've just become in love with the wine industry just as you are. Certainly haven't taken it to the level you have, but it's all because you were kind that day, and hopefully I've been a good customer as well.
Yes, you have wonderful customer,
So
and
so we
the
love
people
wine.
the people involved, with that auction too, was very instrumental for us.
Yeah, we all became good friends,
Yeah,
and timing was right, for you as well, because just opening your store, you could use some customers,
for
we
sure.
thought anyway,
Yeah,
and you were good to us, and hopefully we've reciprocated. But for anybody who hasn't been to the wine exchange in Santa Ana, it's right off the 55 freeway in Dyer Road between Dyer Road and Warner, and you definitely need to go there. So let's talk about you and Bordeaux.
Okay.
You've spent 30 years in the industry. At what point did you get into a passion for Bordeaux? What sparked that?
I've always love Bordeaux wines. I mean, even when I got into wine within the restaurant industry, when I would go shopping, I would always look for Bordeaux wines as well, because that was kind of like my thought was, Bordeaux was the king of wine. It was like that's like the end all be all back, especially back in that era. It was it was Napa Valley, it was Bordeaux. Then eventually I got into Burgundy and other things as well. But Bordeaux was really kind of the one thing that I really got into. And then when I started at the wine exchange, um, Bordeaux reminded me a lot of the stock market. We talk about futures. We talk about wines that go up in value. We talk about investment. There's many things with Bordeaux that was just really intriguing to me. And so I started to really dabble more and more into it. And then it was around maybe 2002 that Steve said, why don't you kind of take over Bordeaux? And so I did, and I started going to Bordeaux 2 times a year, sometimes 3 times a year. I
As
got to
often as you could?
as often as I could. Yes, I started to meet a lot of wonderful people, um, and we eventually, we became a wine exchange. We would sell millions of dollars of Bordeaux. We were a really big Bordeaux house. And so, yeah, I just, it was just fun. It's exciting, we talked a little bit before we went on the air about en premier, and en premier is when you sell Bordeaux wine futures, and I just found that so fascinating to me about how they allocate in tranches, and there's a first tranche prize, and then you grab all you can and you give it to your customers, and then there's a next, if the wine's strong enough and gets good enough scores, it keeps going up in price, and so yeah, it was just one of those things that everything kind of went together, and I was very passionate about it.
And so let's just kind of break down for our listeners and our viewers. Bordeaux is a region. There are several wine regions in the world. Some in California, many in France, Italy, Spain, Argentina.
Mm.
So, but Bordeaux is Bordeaux one of the oldest?
It's old. I mean, essentially Romans planted vines there. So you have areas in Saint-Emilion where there's still like ruins from, back in the, you know, Roman times.
Yeah.
And so yes, they have been around a long time. Whether it's the oldest region, because there's many regions when you talk about like areas like um, Georgia, and kind of in that area of the world where there were, they have amphora that goes back to before Christ, so
Yeah.
but as far as I think, if as far as a region that we are familiar with, especially here in the United States, Bordeaux is definitely one of the oldest regions, and especially for
And
growing Cabernet and Merlot and those varietals.
is it so well known because it's old, or is it well known because it's also one of the finest, produces some of the finest wines?
Good question. I think a little bit of both. I think, but I think more on the lines of quality. When you look at, like, especially in the United States, like Thomas Jefferson. I mean, he was one of the guys that would travel to Bordeaux all the time, and and
Right.
and try to bring wines back, and so I think that's where you know it became known here in the United States. Over time, I think not just back then, but recently, maybe in the last 75 years after Prohibition, Bordeaux really picked up steam. A lot of the Bordelais would travel here, would tour the Americas, and really for us, for California, for example, coming out of Prohibition, it took us time to kind of really rebuild ourselves here. So and Bordeaux was already going. They were already producing. They were producing through World War II. They were producing, all the time. So I think that's another reason why here in the United States, Bordeaux is, and for the world for that matter, Bordeaux is very popular.
The growers there, the chateau owners,
Hmm.
they must have a sense of pride about being in that region, are they not?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. It, in Bordeaux, you have a right bank and a left bank, and they're
Which
and they're
we're going to talk about.
and they're quite different, yeah. But the owners, of course, they're very prideful. They're so dedicated. They're true farmers. I mean, these guys, uh, most of them are HVE3, which is high environmental standards. Many of them are organic. A lot are even biodynamic, which is even the most intense way to farm. That we don't, we do it here in California, but they are really into it in Bordeaux. And so, again, I know many of the chateau owners, and they come and see me here. We do events with them.
I know.
Yeah, they love the craft. They love what they do, and like me, I love what I do, and I think they wouldn't do anything else. Many of
Yeah.
them have sold
Yeah.
their old businesses, their supermarkets, their sporting goods stores, and get into wine.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we interviewed someone last week who actually sold all his business and went to the apple orchards in Julian. So yeah, we kind of get that on a local level. So
Mhm.
do you think that tell me then, because I'm just curious, are a lot of the vineyards still, or do you call them the chateaus? Do you call them the vineyards? Are they still owned by their old families? Have they been passed down through the families for a long time?
Yes, many have. Uh, Not so much on the left or the left bank as much as on the right bank. And then, I mean, Bordeaux there's thousands and thousands of estates in Bordeaux. Um, and some of the smaller states have been in the family for generation. Some of the bigger properties have been passed on just because of the inheritance tax is so high in France. So now, if you have an estate that is making world-class wine, let's just say, like a Beaujeu de Faux, for example, in the right bank, they essentially have to sell. Canon sold to Chanel. Chanel LVMH owns Cheval Blanc. These are the big companies that have the money that can buy. Now, what they end up doing, they keep the family on, to run the estate, but they don't own the estate anymore. These big conglomerates are starting to come in and buy these estates.
That's sad to some extent, although I can see from the business standpoint why it's important. It's always nice to know that the families are still involved in the
Yeah,
production of it.
no, for
There,
sure.
because it's just such a personal thing. We talked to your partner Kyle several times. It's such a personal thing. It's like you're the farmer, right?
Yeah,
You're the farmer of the land, and it's so personal.
no, it's very personal for many of the chateau owners, and you can see that in the pride. You can see that in the wines they make. They're Bordeaux is really in the last 25 years as they've they really honed their craft. And whether you believe in global warming or not, global warming has really helped Bordeaux be
Really,
consistent. Yeah, oh my gosh, yes. I mean, if you look at vintages from let's say the 60s, 50s, um, even the 70s and 80s, there are maybe in a decade, there are maybe only three good vintages within that decade, but here between 2010 and 2020, let's just say, you probably have seven good vintages and three bad vintages just because it's now getting warm in France, and grapes like warm weather. They like diurnal shifts in temperature, and Bordeaux's on the Atlantic, so you get sometimes hot days
right?
and cooler nights. And then again, when we talk about farming, they've really learned how to farm their land. They there's a lot of obstacles that sometimes happen within the year, hail, rot,
Rain,
too much rain,
hot.
yeah, too hot, yeah, and you get mildew and disease pressure, et cetera, et cetera. And these guys are great. I remember one time, you might have met Helen Garcon because she's come here a few times
Oh, I do. I
actually.
love Helene. Yes,
Yeah,
yes, and she loves you. She brought me into her home, and of course, she loves you.
I know.
She does.
So she's wonderful. She's like my sister. Every time I go there, I spend time with her. But I was having lunch with her and her husband, and we were just sitting there, and all of a sudden he was on his phone, and it was like next thing I know, he's on his tractor out in the vineyard, and what's happening? And there's this big front that's starting to move in, and it was going to rain, so he was out there spraying copper to protect it from mildew, and that's part of
Oh,
organic farming. Um, and so, again, it goes back to families and farmers and these guys. It's a Saturday, it's nice, the weather's nice, and he says, "Sorry, got to go out in the field." So.
yeah. Absolutely. So let's talk about the key things we want to cover in our interview, our time together today is what are the key regions within Bordeaux and how do they differ? And is this the same as any other wine region? You have key differences in Napa and in the Central Coast as you do in Bordeaux, or are they different for some reason? And what is that?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, you again, I mentioned earlier, you have a right bank and left bank, and so, and they're two very different places, as far as both soil and grape variety. That is mainly the special. If you, like, for example, in when you're in the Medoc area, so the Medoc is the area that has, Saint Estèphe, Pauillac, Saint Julien, Margaux, those regions, Mouly, uh, uh, that's mainly gravel. And at one point, that was a swamp, and the Dutch came and drained that area. And so you have essentially very gravelly soils. And so Cabernet Sauvignon, they do really well in gravel because the gravel soils retain heat. They're and they have really great drainage for water, for example. So there you're going to get more Cabernet based wines. In the right bank, when you cross over the two rivers, the Garonne and the Dordogne, you have more limestone and clay. And limestone is good for Merlot because limestone retains water and clay retains water. And I remember Helen once told me that this is a cool terroir. And what that means is that it's great for Merlot. It's great for Cabernet Franc even too. And so the right bank, Saint-Emilion, Pomerol, Fronsac, Castillon, those areas are more Merlot dominant, but they're planting more Cabernet Franc because of global warming. So,
Yeah.
so you're seeing little, probably 70% Merlot, 30% Cabernet Franc, depending on the wine and the chateau. Um, Again, the two areas couldn't be more different. Uh, and Bordeaux is big, and how it compares to even California, because in California we have weather that is could change so much. As we know, living in Orange County, you could be at the beach and it's 60 degrees and foggy, and you can go to Yorba Linda and it's 100 degrees and clear, and
That,
that's and Bordeaux isn't like that. Bordeaux is pretty temperate. I mean, you can get closer to the water. It's maybe a little cool, little more diurnal shifts in temperature, but not too much. Whereas California, you can be at, let's say Sonoma Coast, it's like being in Newport Beach, Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, then you go to Napa Valley and it could be like, the Inland Empire, and that's where you grow Cabernet. So, so it's a little different in that regard, but Bordeaux's a big place. And again, I just mentioned some areas, but then you have all the satellite areas. You have Pisaclonion, which is south of the city of Bordeaux. You have Sauternes, which goes to sweet wines, which is a little bit further south than that. And so, yeah, it's really fascinating place, though.
One of the things I find interesting, and maybe I'm just incorrect, maybe I'm just naive or inexperienced, is that we hear the term a lot. This is a Bordeaux. This is a Bordeaux, but you don't hear people say this is a Napa,
Right.
right? So why is that?
The old world. So there's a new world and old world. It's at
Right.
least this is how we look at wine. And the new world usually talks a lot about varietal. Like like, oh, it's a Cabernet from Napa Valley, as opposed to a Bordeaux. And this is a funny thing actually, because I don't know if you remember the movie Sideways when they talked.
Yes.
He talked down Merlot, and the Merlot sales here in our country just nosedive. And it's been 20 years, and it's still the same thing. If you say, "Oh, it's a Napa Valley Merlot," most people kind of shun away from it. It's so strange. But Bordeaux, if you're in the right bank, like Petrus, which is the most expensive wine in Bordeaux, is 100% Merlot. Bordeaux essentially it's like it's a region. It's like saying Orange County, you know, and then you have the sub regions within Bordeaux, like again I mentioned Pauillac, Saint Estèphe, Saint Julien, Sauternes. Those are like cities, villages within, and then you have the wineries within those villages. So, but Bordeaux, you're going to get Cabernet or Merlot based wines. They don't grow Pinot Noir in Bordeaux. They don't grow, you know, Riesling. Well, they probably do, but they don't. I mean, they don't sell Riesling in Bordeaux. It's basically Cabernet based, Merlot based wines for the reds, and Sauvignon Blanc and Semillon for the whites.
Is that the case more in Bordeaux than in other areas that it has so it has fewer varietals, fewer types of grapes?
Well, not for France. I mean, if you look at places like Burgundy, and we don't want to go off the subject, we're talking Bordeaux, but Burgundy's Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, or Aligoté, or
Right.
it's
Yeah.
again goes back to where you're talking about history and the hundreds and hundreds of years, and the monks and the Romans and everybody that really studied what grows best here, and so that's kind of the thing. So each region has their their specialty grape, I guess. When you look at the Rhone, the North Rhone, Syrah, South Rhone, Grenache, that kind of thing.
Right.
So, whereas like, if you take Sonoma, they grow everything pretty much.
Well, yeah, that's true. So tell us, and we don't want to take too much time because we have so many things we do want to ask you, but
Okay.
so what is the big difference? And I saw you do this on a map, which helped me a lot, but we don't have our viewers and our listeners don't get to see that map. What is the real difference? And you've said now a couple of times that the right bank and the left bank are very different. First of all, they're the right and the left bank of what? And second of all, what are their major differences and why is that important?
Well, the difference is, first of all, is terroir. Terroir is a word that the French use about the land and the soil and the earth and what makes the wine what it is, and the people too. I had an argument actually with Helen about that. I said, "Tell all things not from man," and Helen's like, "No, wait, man is very important." So, but the, I mean, it goes back to you have in Bordeaux, you have the Bordeaux city, which is a quite a large city, um, and you have the river is the Garonne River, and basically it comes in from the ocean. Well, actually it starts in the Pyrenees and it comes down and goes out to the ocean. But that, and then on the obviously the left side of that is the left bank, and then you cross over, and then you have the Entre-deux-Mers. Entre-deux-Mers is between two seas, so you have an area where they grow wine. Most of the wine in Entre-deux-Mers is pretty inexpensive. Hard to find anything over, let's say, maybe $15 would be max in the Entre-deux-Mers.
Oh.
And then, and there's some great wines in Entre-deux-Mers. We sell like Marjos, who's owned by Pierre Lerton from Cheval Blanc.
Yes, you spoiled some of us in our group with that. We now all have bought multiple bottles of Marjos. It's a big
Great
hit around
wine
here.
in Entre-deux-Mers.
Great one.
Yeah, but $15, and it gets great
Yeah.
scores. But
A
that's
great wine. Great
yeah.
wine. We love it.
And then you cross another river called the Dordogne, and that's where you go into essentially the right bank. And there you have Fronsac, Castillon, Saint-Emilion, Palmerol is the area there. Again, what I mentioned earlier, gravelly soils in the left bank and limestone clay soils in the right bank. So, and visually, they're very different. Visually, it's the left bank is very flat, whereas the right bank has hills, there's the limestone coat. So both are very picturesque. It's hard to pick, but Saint Emilion is a World Heritage Site. It's a wonderful little village, and
It
and
is beautiful.
yeah, so there is quite a bit of difference. And then when you get down even in south of the city in Pessac-Léognan, it's more foresty. You go down to Sauternes, again more foresty, and Sauternes is where they get the fog that creates the botrytis to make sweet wine. So it's a very big place.
It is, but it's beautiful. It's charming and it's
It
beautiful.
is.
I've only been there once or twice, but it's beautiful. Certainly the kind of place that you want to go back to. So Bordeaux is often associated with high prices because that's just what people think. Maybe a little bit of, I don't want to say snob factor, but just reputation factor.
Mm,
And now you just mentioned Marjos. So there are some prices for everybody.
yes. Actually, I think Bordeaux makes some of the best value wines in the world. Um,
Really?
oh yeah, oh yeah. Again, you have the top 250, let's just say. But we talked about, there's over 6,000 chateaux in Bordeaux. And so there are dedicated farmers that make wonderful wine. Again, Marjos being one of them, who his team they farm organically. They got old vines. They got with Pierre Lurton, being the fact that he runs Cheval Blanc and Yquem, they got resources. And a lot of times you'll see that. You'll see like the other wine we do a lot of here is called Chateau Puy-Garode, which is owned by the Thiepont family. They make wine for Beauchesser Defoe, Pavi McCann, Vieux Chateau Sertan. They actually own Vieux Chateau Sertan and Pavi McCann. So these are like experts, but they have their home estates that are in the satellite regions that still have great terroir, but they're 14, 15, $20, for a spectacular wine that will age. And some of our customers realize, because when I go back, I look for that older stuff. And we've had old Chateau Marceau. It's under $25. It has some of the same terroirs, Petrus, that has blue clay. Um, so yes, no, I think they make some great,
And we
outstanding
appreciate, by the
wines.
way, we appreciate your searches, right? And we appreciate that you bring those back to us, by the way. We just
Well,
want you to know that.
it goes back to when I was a poor waiter. I wanted to experience what it was like to drink an aged Bordeaux for $20. So I'm just kind of fulfilling, something that I wished for, 30 years ago.
If we want to start drinking Bordeaux wines, we don't know anything about it. Can you recommend a Bordeaux starter pack?
We have a great staff here that will point people in any direction they want to go. We have a lot of younger people because we just opened the wine bar. We have the wine bar with the
Yes.
machines, and so
Yes.
we have a lot of young people that are really curious, and that's the one thing that I love, because again, I was once that person, and to come in and we say, I want to try Bordeaux. I'm not really sure what to try. I don't want to spend a lot of money. We have plenty of choices under $20. For the person that's taking it to the next level, who wants to, maybe venture into one of the main appellations, the Pauillacs of the world, and the Margots, and the Saint Estèphe and Saint Emilion of Pomerol, etc. We have those to where now they're graduating to the next level. They want to spend maybe $30 or $35, 40, 50, around there. Then we have a plethora of wines in that category. And then if they want to go to the next level, spend 75, 100, 125, 150, then we can steer them into the high-end room, and we have a whole, slew of wines in that category as well. This goes back to, finding classified growth wines, because again, the 1855 classification, uh, and those will be in the wines that you can collect, you can age. Again, like I said before, I do look for older vintages that are ready to drink.
So let me ask you a question. One of the things that we think about when we think of Bordeaux is that they're old, right? That the age of the wine is important. That really old wines with higher prices, we think of them as being from Bordeaux. Is that
Hmm.
accurate?
Pretty much. I think when people are talking about vintage or good vintages, they're usually talking Bordeaux. Uh, I think more than any other reason. When I look at older regions of the world, if we're going back to like 1982 or, even further back to 1970 or 61, it's Bordeaux. People are talking Bordeaux. People are not talking Napa Valley for older vintages, because Napa Valley, even though, in the 70s they were really starting to gain steam, you know, and making some really great wines. But I like it with the Paris Judgment, for example, when Napa
Yes.
Valley, kind of took the prize. Uh, but when you're talking older vintages, and even in my, wine career, most of the older wines that I've tasted in the 60s and 50s have been Bordeaux. There's something magical that happens when Bordeaux ages, and we
There,
just,
there just there just must be.
yeah,
Just
there's
must
just
be
something
something
magical. When you
magical.
taste an old Bordeaux that's in a perfect spot, boy, it truly is magic.
Yep, and that sounds great. So people should come to you. You will help them.
Mhm.
And if they want to start their cellar, they can start, or their collection, they can start at pretty much any price range.
Right.
Any recent vintages that stand out. Sometimes I'll hear you guys talk about, oh, like the 94 vintage or the 2008 vintage. So what's the recent history been like?
Well, luckily for Bordeaux, we've had a string of just phenomenal vintages. Um, Basically, 22 is I've never tasted wines like 22. Yeah, the wines are just profound. Uh, I it's when you taste them, it's a 22. 20, 19, 18, 16, 15 are all great vintages. 15 is starting to show that 10 when you're 10 years old now, it's starting to show the tertiary flavors when you're getting more of that earth and terroir and mushrooms and such. It's not very primary, fruit, like blue fruits or black fruits. um, Prior to that, 2010, 2009, 2005. So Bordeaux's had a string of some pretty great vintages, and then there's some sleeper vintages too. So, um, yeah, and then we even go older, 98, 2000. In fact, I don't know, I've mentioned Helen a lot today. I should, when this is done, I'm going to send it to her.
I know
But I
we
got
should
an
just call
offer.
her up and
I got an
yeah.
offer from her this morning of 98 and 2000 Clos Lease for Pomerol property at a really phenomenal price. So keep an eye out for that one. I probably might buy some of that. So, but yeah, it's vintages in Bordeaux was in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and 50s, and 40s for that matter. Vintage was very important because then there was a lot of fluctuation. Where now we're seeing a little bit more of a consistency in great
So if
vintages.
someone wanted to start a cellar, if I said, okay, I want to start a collection,
Mhm.
and so to speak. So what would I want to buy?
Well, it depends on how long you want to hold wines for if you're going to start a cellar. So I would highly recommend some of the later vintages that I just mentioned, the 22 vintage, the 20 vintage, the 19 vintage, 18 vintage, 16 and 15. Uh, those wines are still priced, reasonably for what they are, and very age worthy. And then the other is if you're starting a collection and you're either acting as a collector because we deal with some of the top collectors in the country who are looking for a return on their wines. They're hoping to buy it for 300 and sell it for 1,000. You know, and I have a lot of guys. They all have their spreadsheets. They all have what they bought it for, what the current market is, and all that stuff. They come in and those guys are looking for or they're looking for scores. Good scores from the press that is going to keep keep the value, level or even going up. And so we've seen that in a lot of wines actually that have sold for $25 and are now selling for $50 in the marketplace. That's 100% return on your money. So
That's pretty crazy.
yeah.
Yeah, that's
So
pretty crazy. Well, I could be happy with that. And of course, you might have to buy an extra bottle so you can taste it, right? You got to be sure that the quality is there. You
oh,
wouldn't
for
want to
sure.
just open without having a little taste yourself.
Yeah, we'll buy a 6-pack plus one.
Absolutely, absolutely. So tell us, you've traveled so much there. You've met so many people. Many of them you've brought here, and we have had the opportunity to meet them also and share in your experiences. Do you have a particular story of someone, an owner or a family, who really meant a lot to you, or their story was impressive?
Probably, I mean, boy, I got a lot of them. Uh, but one family that really stands out is the Bicot family. Um, uh, Juliette Bicot, she, the family owns Beauchers or Bicot, and then they own a couple other little satellite properties. She has a Joan and Bicot in Castillon, and that was kind of Juliette's project when she first started getting into wines. And then once her father Gerard retired, then now her and her husband are running Beauchers Bicot, and they're doing a fantastic job. They just received their 100 points for their 2022 vintage wine, which is basically can't get any higher than that. But what I really love about the family is they really took me in. I stayed with them many times. They sponsored me to become in the Girard de Saint Emilion. I'm a Girard member, which is a big ordeal in Saint Emilion. We wear these big red robes, and we're kind of to talk about who we are and what we've done. And then Gerard, he has an old 356 Porsche, and I'm a big
Oh
Porsche,
gosh.
classic Porsche fan. I know your husband's a big old car guy, and so we just got along very well. And the family has just been like a family to me. I'd get up every morning, have breakfast with her, Juliette's mother, and she would make this just the strongest coffee. But it was so good because the previous day I was tasting wine all day, so I'd get up and want to get going for the day, and so she would make this strong coffee. So she's definitely one of them. And then the other, like I mentioned, like the Garcin family, Helen and Patrice, her husband, are just again they're just phenomenal people.
And then you have a friend whose name starts with a C, who I met when I met Helen.
A friend
Chris
that starts with a
C.
C. Oh, is it Jean-Christophe Moreau?
Yes, yes,
Yeah,
thank you.
yeah. No, Jean-Christophe, again, he's another. I've watched his career like grow. Now, he had a little small wine negotiant company uh, called Domaine Select, and we would buy wines because he would sell wines from the Languedoc and Bordeaux and a lot of like little wines in Saint Emilion. And then he started to work with Dino Lobos K, which is Peter Kwok. Uh, and so Peter's a very successful businessman. And so he owns Tour Saint Christophe, so that JC now runs all the estates for Peter, Tourmaline, Belfond Belsier, Aubrisson. So yeah, he's just again, he's another one of my best friends. It's so hard to like for me to pick, one or two or three because there's so many of them that I have. Veronique Sanders from Haut-Bailly is another great friend of mine. Jean Charles Caz from Lynch Bage, Kelly Surfer,
Yeah.
so just too many.
And you brought the lady here who had a really interesting story, but I think she was from Spain. The lady whose family also owns a vineyard in Argentina, but she was from Spain, right?
Well, Helen owns a property in
No,
Argentina
she was an
too.
she was an actress. She did you did a demonstration in the store. That's okay. We can talk about it
Okay.
later. Okay, okay. So, what's the most surprising Bordeaux you've ever tasted? Something that completely defied your expectations.
Too many.
Every year, huh?
Too many. Wow, yeah, boy, that's a tough question because there's been so many wines that I've had that I just like, whoa. Uh, the one wine that really comes to mind we sold that I remember I had the negotiant send me a sample of was the 1998 Latour Haut-Brion. And it wasn't a very expensive one. We were selling it for maybe, I mean, it was part of the Haut-Brion, Chateau Haut-Brion, which is a very expensive wine. But Latour Haut-Brion was the second wine for Le Mission Haut-Brion. And that wine we were selling for maybe 80, $90, something like that. And I remember tasting the wine and I, and Kyle was with me at the time. And we both looked at each other and were like, wow, what is this, And we ended up buying all they had. And so when the wine came, we offered it out. We sold most of it. And then Brendan in the back said, "Oh, I have an extra case of Haut-Brion 98." This was like a couple years later. So we we opened a bottle, and sure enough, the wine was the same. And I remember talking to a negotiant, one of my wine merchants in Bordeaux, and he was saying like, I told him about this wine, and he was like, "Yeah, I was talking to the head at Chateau Palmer, and he was telling me about the same wine." So obviously, I mean, that was one of the wines that I think for me was just a shocker because I wasn't expecting it. But man, that was great.
What a good wine. If you could sit down and drink a bottle of Bordeaux with anyone in history, who would it be and why did you choose that person?
Oh boy, anyone in history, famous or not famous? Does it,
Famous or not famous?
hmm, wow, that's a tough question. Um, Well, if I spoke French fluently, I'd probably want to sit down like with someone like Napoleon or something crazy, just
There you
you
go.
know.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah,
Yeah, that would be amazing, wouldn't it? Someone
yes,
who would have known wines from those times, right?
exactly. Yep. And he was a big wino. I
He
mean,
was.
oh, he was, yeah,
Napoleon was.
yeah.
Well, that's interesting. That's interesting.
Hmm.
And so many more stories. What trends in consumer behavior, Tristan, are you seeing today? Are younger drinkers approaching Bordeaux differently than in past generations? Are they more interested in Bordeaux than they have been? Yes or no? Does it matter to them?
Hmm. No, yeah, I think they're less interested than before. The just the trend is different. I think if you take the time when I was, let's say, just starting to get into wine. There wasn't there really it was California, France, or Italy. And in Italy, we're back in that era. We're it's Barolo, Brunello, Chianti. So it wasn't like it is now, where there's so many different regions in Italy. In France, it was pretty much Bordeaux and maybe Burgundy. But now there's Bordeaux, Burgundy, Rhone North, Rhone South, Languedoc. That there's more choices for people to select. And I'd never drank an Argentinian wine when I was growing up. I barely drank Chilean wines. I was introduced to Australia. When the world of wine has really expanded, so it gives people more choices. So I think those who maybe are in my age group, we kind of grew up with Bordeaux as being like, oh, Bordeaux's the king of wine, so I got to get into Bordeaux. If I'm going to collect wine, I got to collect Bordeaux. And I think that's the difference. And I think even still, collectors still buy Bordeaux. I know all my top collectors are heavily Bordeaux centric, as far as what they have. But I think for the youth, I think, we're seeing a little bit of youth really interested in Bordeaux. I think it kind of changes per country too. I was having dinner with a very successful businessman from Mexico, and he says the youth is really into wine in Mexico, as opposed to the youth here is kind of they're into it, but they're dabbling in a couple different things, whether it's RTDs, ready to drink, stuff. They're into cannabis, there's just a lot of different things where you don't have those in other countries.
So you have 1 minute. Tell our audience and our viewers and our listeners, what should they know about Bordeaux that anybody can apply to? And if they can't go to France, they can go to your store. Is there another region in California that's similar to a Bordeaux?
Well, another region that would be similar to Bordeaux in California would be Napa Valley, probably the closest for sure, hands down. Cabernet based wines, Merlot based wines. Um, Paris Judgment was really Napa versus Bordeaux. Um, so that was probably the very closest, or like Washington State, like Red Mountain, that area of Washington does Bordeaux varietals really well. Argentina does Bordeaux varietals really well. So, but in in my opinion, you can find great Bordeaux in any price range, and we mentioned this before. From $12 to 2,000. There's such a big range. The other thing is Bordeaux makes great white wine, and
Ah,
and that's a lot of people don't think about that. But
no.
Bordeaux makes some of the best white wines in the world as well, and they're getting better at it. And so again, I know many of our customers like Claude Lune, that wine that we buy every year. It's 14, $15. Always gets really good scores, beautiful package, and is delicious for the money. So and white wines vary in price as well. Um, and then there's the sweet wines, the sauternes.
Yeah,
There's no really place in the world that makes wine like Sauterne. Um,
yeah.
you just got a very unique area where they can grow this botrytis on the grapes that will, basically make this just beautiful nectar of a wine. So whatever your price range is, if you like
Come
Cabernet
into the
based
wine
wines,
exchange
we
and
got you
pick out
covered.
some. Got you covered. Well, you'll need to come back again because I haven't covered all my questions and we still have more things we'd love to know. So I have to come back. But
Anytime.
it's been a wonderful journey through Bordeaux with Tristen Beamon. We've learned that Bordeaux doesn't have to be intimidating. You don't need to think that it's too expensive or that only people drink it who know a lot about wine. That's not true. The stories, the people, the wines, they're for every kind of drinker or wine enthusiast. So whether you're ready to splurge into a collector's bottle, you're ready to buy one as a future, or you just want to dip your toe into something a little bit less expensive, like a Marjot's, and have something fun and casual, Tristan's insights remind us that wine is all about connection, exploration, joy, and so much history and personality. Thank you so much for joining us today, Tristan. And
My
thank you to our
pleasure.
viewers and listeners for joining us on SoCal with Val. Until next time, here's to discovering new tastes, new places, and always raising a glass to life's best moments. We'll see you next week on SoCal with Val.